It's mid-November 2009, and the Western Hemisphere was getting their first look at a true pioneer in shipbuilding. Oasis of the Seas, Royal Caribbean International's newest cruise ship, was arriving in her home port of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, for the very first time. Under the fresh yellow glow of the early sunrise, and surrounded by several fireboats, helicopters, hundreds upon hundreds of maritime enthusiasts, the media, and the general public, the 225,000-ton giant slowly made her way up the small channel and into the turning basin. As she made the final turn into the newly renovated Terminal 18, the onlookers got their first views of some of the never-before-seen or thought possible items that covered her aft. Oasis and her sister, Allure of the Seas, which came out roughly a year later, were absolute monsters in this industry. Many questioned their validity even well after they entered service. Despite the odds, they triumphed. This massive jump forward showed the many benefits of having ships of this size. It allowed for so many more possibilities and amenities and features to be implemented into their designs, some of which were thought, as stated prior, impossible to accommodate. As the industry grew to accommodate and accept these new behemoths, Royal Caribbean was already dreaming of even more sisters to follow in their footsteps. This is the story of that evolution of this very successful and profitable class, as well as one of its most well-designed and innovative members, Wonder of the Seas. Wonder of the Seas is the fifth in the lineup of the Oasis class, and at 235,600 gross tons, she was the largest passenger ship at the time of her entry into service in March 2022. The noticeable increase in tonnage from her previous sister, Symphony of the Seas, is largely thanks to the number of additions and improvements that were implemented into her design. The reasons for these additions stems from a variety of circumstances that start with her long and somewhat chaotic development, but it was also her place in her owner's timeline that made her a test subject for even bigger and better ships to follow in her wake. The cruise industry of the first years of the 21st century had seen steadily bigger and more innovative ships, and it seemed that their only limits in going bigger were existing technology and their current port infrastructure. However, one glaring worry for many of these companies and shipyards was the idea that there is a hard limit in how big they could go. Yet with each new class that came out for lines, such as Royal Caribbean, Princess, or Carnival, it demonstrated that the proverbial ceiling had not been reached. By the mid-2000s, the biggest ships were starting to cross into the 150,000-ton range, and many experts and executives felt that going any bigger would be a grave mistake, whether it be the idea of there being too many people on board, the long lines and bottlenecking, the lack of possible port visits, or the logistical nightmares of moving people, food, and cargo around such a large vessel. All were very valid worries. Several concepts, both well-known and obscure, for even bigger ships were put forward, but for one reason or another, most did not get beyond the drawing board. But one seemed to break that trend, and it was Project Genesis, now known as the Oasis class. By the beginning of 2011, the cruising world had started to accept the new giants Oasis and Allure, but there were still a number of cruisers, travel agents, port officials, and executives that felt that they were too big to handle. Indeed, they did have their limitations, but most of these did not involve the ship's design per se. It was the fact that the existing infrastructure was either not ready or simply not accommodating. For much of those early years, the duo was limited to not even a dozen ports of call, most of which were located within the Caribbean. Even when Oasis was on her maiden voyage, one of those few ports that could accept her, Nassau, almost didn't work out due to the fact that their dredging operations had not been completed in time. It was a game of catch-up, but for those who traveled aboard the ships themselves, they were almost anything but an issue. Their sheer size allowed for a massive canvas to apply any number of never-before-seen or thought-possible items. These included, to name a few, the first aqua theater, zip line, park with live plants, and carousel at sea. It also allowed for a massive increase in choice of food, entertainment, and relaxation for any cruiser to partake in, well north of 50% more than the previous record holders could offer. What could be stated as their biggest contribution to the industry is how they solved the numerous possible issues that would clearly arise in having more than 5,000 or 6,000 passengers on board each voyage. Traditionally on previous ships, most passengers could be found in the same areas at the same time throughout the day, due to the limited number of venues. For dining, a good majority would either be in the buffet or the main dining room. During midday and afternoon, most could be found in the pool area, which is usually limited to the center top part of the ship. And for entertainment, most could be found in venues located in the center lower parts of the hull during the night. It was sometimes hard to find ways to enjoy the things the ship offered without the majority or good chunk of the ship's population doing exactly the same thing. What was introduced to help solve this issue was the neighborhood concept. The idea was to spread people out into different areas of the ship at all times. Each area would have its own overall theme and offer similar types of venues, but different activities and offerings which related to that area's theme. The ships offered 7 such neighborhoods. Most well known of these include Central Park, which offers multiple different dining venues, shops, relaxation areas, and bars, all of which are surrounded by 12,000 live plants. Another area is the Boardwalk, an area reminiscent of Atlantic City, New Jersey, which offers additional dining venues, bars, activities, and shops. While there still are times where areas are busy and feel crowded, the ships did a very good job in spreading the population out. The feeling from most is that it seemed more crowded and overwhelming on some much smaller ships. Another side benefit is that it helped some to better understand where they were and where they wanted to go. Even with all the odds and early criticism stacked against them, the cruising world embraced the 225,000-ton giants fairly quickly. The $2.8 billion gamble Royal Caribbean had made was starting to pay off. It became clear that the notion that these two would be a one-off was quickly fading away. It was only a matter of time before additional sisters would join their ranks. In the latter months of 2012, Royal Caribbean Group began negotiations with the STX Europe shipyard in Turku, Finland, to build a third Oasis-class ship. They were the obvious choice, as they had built Oasis and Allure previously. Tied with these talks were orders for the first new builds of one of the company's joint ventures, TUI Cruises. The shipyard, though seemingly in the best position than the other choices, was in a difficult situation financially. Eventually, the Finnish shipyard received the new build TUI builds, but the order for the third Oasis member was placed with the STX France shipyard located in Saint-Nazaire, France. A good chunk of time had elapsed between the completion of Oasis and Allure when the order was made on December 27, 2012, enough so that this vessel would make some noticeable changes to the design in response to feedback received from the first two. Some of these changes included an expanded solarium, a slightly more modern finish in the cabins and public areas, the longest dry slide at sea, changes in hull, propulsion, and lighting technology, and the installation of additional exhaust scrubbing machinery placed inside the funnels. All these changes resulted in an increase in tonnage from 225,282 to 226,963. In May 2016, yard number A34 emerged from the French shipyard, ready to take on the world. She was later christened Harmony of the Seas. Following a brief summer season in the Mediterranean, she sailed to Fort Lauderdale to meet up with Oasis and Allure just off the Floridian coast. It was a sight to behold for everyone on board and those watching on the beaches to see these three mammoths right next to each other. Another sister was ordered in May 2014 that featured a lot of the same changes Harmony implemented. She entered service in April 2018 and was christened Symphony of the Seas. Certainly, by 2019, the industry had grown accustomed to the Oasis class. Though the competition had not really begun to catch up in size, they were definitely implementing the lessons learned from them, as well as coming up with their own ideas. For much of those early years, the class was in a league of their own. Now, slowly but surely, the competition was catching up and chipping away at their lead. Tastes were also beginning to change for the traveling public, and elements of the Oasis class design across the four sisters were beginning to show in a negative way. There were three main issues that were beginning to become mainstream. First is the severe lack of outward-facing venues. When the class was first designed, it was felt that having a more enclosed feel would bring on more non-cruisers, as their fears of the sea would be tamed. This did work, but it was now becoming more of a mainstream issue. Second was the lack of all-climate venues. Throughout the 2010s, much of the competition's new classes were designed to have versatile venues that could be used in all sorts of different climates and weather. This allowed for a greater percentage of the ship's public areas to be better utilized if it is not ideal outside. With the Oasises, if the weather was anything but warm and at best overcast, the number of available places to go was fairly limited. And third is the lack of a modern feel. While Harmony and Symphony had made attempts to give a better finish in the cabins and public spaces, by now it was seen as dark and somewhat out of date. With the increase in technology, the simplest of things, like the lack of plugins for devices in the cabins, was becoming a nuisance. Even with these problems, the quartet was doing very well, but if they wanted to keep their lead, even more changes had to be implemented in any future sisters that would come. Thankfully, that was indeed on the minds of the owners, but they were not thinking of simply updating a few things here and there. They had even bigger and bolder ideas planned for the future of the Oasis line. The idea of there being a fifth Oasis class ship started back in September 2013, just prior to when construction on Harmony first commenced, when a supply report stated that a fourth Oasis-class ship order would be confirmed the following summer, and that a fifth order would follow shortly thereafter. While the fourth ship was indeed ordered the following year, official news of a fifth sister did not materialize. That all changed a few days prior to Harmony's maiden voyage, when a memorandum of understanding was signed between Royal Caribbean and STX France. The agreement was signed on May 25, 2016, and it stated that the ship was to be delivered in spring 2021. Richard Fain, chairman and CEO of Royal Caribbean Cruises Limited, shared his excitement about the class's growth. The response to the arrival of Harmony of the Seas is staggering, eliciting excitement from eager cruisers from markets on both sides of the Atlantic. Royal Caribbean President and CEO Michael Bailey added, "The Oasis-class ships have delivered beyond expectations each time. Harmony of the Sea's warm reception is evidence that growing this class of ship will continue to drive exceptional performance for the brand." There were still a few more years until construction could officially begin on the fifth vessel. In that time, Royal Caribbean Group was beginning to work on a number of innovative and revolutionary projects to come out in the late 2010s and into the 2020s. So much was going to change from tradition. Like the ocean liners of the past, various layouts, features, machinery, and concepts were tested on existing ships or ones which would come out prior to see if the ideas made sense, function, and to find bugs that could only be found if it was actually made. For Royal, this fifth member would be the perfect vessel to perform all sorts of tests for the company's next big project. Eventually, the general arrangement plans were finalized, and construction could finally begin. The next milestone came on April 24, 2019, roughly 3 years after the order was first placed. The first steel was cut for yard number C34 during the traditional steel cutting ceremony, marking the beginning of construction. In a press release, Royal Caribbean stated that the new ship would combine the iconic 7 neighborhood concept that her sisters feature with a bold and unexpected lineup of thrilling experiences, imaginative dining, unparalleled entertainment, and the latest technology. To add more to the excitement of this milestone was the news that had been released a few months prior that a 6th ship was on the way. By late 2019, the first of the many grand blocks which would comprise the superstructure and hull were assembled, signaling that the keel-laying ceremony was nearing. A cruise industry conference was scheduled for October of that year, and among the guest speakers would be Michael Bailey. Speculation of a possible announcement with details regarding the ship began to circulate, including the possibility of the name being Melody of the Seas. Indeed, news did get revealed on the 10th, when Bailey officially announced that the vessel would be debuting from Shanghai, China, and she would be named Wonder of the Seas. Royal Caribbean is known for its innovation and consistently pushing the boundaries of what's possible, and an Oasis-class ship in China is proof of that. Wonder of the Seas will redefine the ultimate vacation and be revolutionary in her own right, and she marks one of Royal Caribbean's most exciting chapters to come. The chairman of the Asian branch of the company added, "Royal Caribbean International has been a market leader in China for more than 10 years by consistently showcasing bold development strategies and driving growth of the new-to-cruise market. The development of Wonder of the Seas is a manifesto of a new era for Royal Caribbean." Later that same day, the first grand block, measuring 155 feet by 65 feet and weighing in at 970 tons, was lowered into the massive dry dock. Assembly of Asia's first Oasis-class ship had officially begun. News of itineraries and new spaces were to come very soon, but then everything came to a crashing halt. It's now late April 2020. After being shut down for several weeks, the French shipyard announced that work on C-34 would resume with a reduced volunteer-only workforce. Nothing was official yet, but it was evident, like every other ship being constructed at that time, that delays in delivery were coming. In July, Royal Caribbean announced the expected news of Wonder's delay on their Chinese website. The construction of the new Oasis-class Wonder of the Seas was delayed due to the impact of the shipyard operation. Royal Caribbean had to delay the development of the Wonder of the Seas from a Chinese home port. However, we look forward to the arrival of Wonder of the Seas after the epidemic has been brought under control as soon as possible. It wasn't until a few weeks later that a new timeline was posted. The new target date for delivery was simply listed as 2022. Amidst all the commotion and uncertainty, assembly of Wonder had progressed steadily. During the night of September 4th and the early hours of the 5th, the dry dock was flooded and C-34 began to float for the first time. As dawn broke over a gray, overcast sky, the door of the dock was removed, and the hull was pulled by 7 tugs out of the dry dock and then moved to the fitting out berth just a little more than 1,600 feet away. Even with the fitting out process now underway, little information was known about what to expect. Anyone who looked at the initial rendering, let alone the emerging construction photos, could see that there would be a huge number of changes compared to the previous sisters, but that is all we had. When trademark names of possible different venues were found online, the speculation grew further. Names like View Bar, Cast and Clipper, Wonder Playscape, and Cantina Fresca kept the curious busy. Despite the major milestone of launching, delays still plagued the shipyard and the shipbuilding industry as a whole. By March the next year, the timeline for delivery was updated, with C-34 to be delivered in Q1 2022, a little less than a year away from the present time. It seemed ambitious, especially since no news on itineraries or amenities were publicly known. It was welcome news nonetheless. News had to be coming very soon, and thankfully it did. On April 16th, poor quality screenshots of the deck plans were leaked, which showed the layout as well as names of some of the new venues. This leak could only mean one thing: official announcements were not far away. Just 3 days later, Royal Caribbean opened up bookings for the new ship from March 2022 through January 2023. From March to November, she would offer cruises out of Shanghai with stops in Japan. Then she would transition to Hong Kong for the winter season to run cruises with stops in Vietnam, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. Within this press release, it was confirmed that Wonder's tonnage would be 236,857 tons, which would solidify her as the largest passenger ship yet built, being 8,776 tons bigger than Symphony. Also contained in the release were the names of the neighborhoods, including the new Suite neighborhood, the first suite-only area of its kind ever offered on a Royal Caribbean ship. Throughout the summer, work progressed at a faster pace than before. On August 20th, C-34 departed Saint-Nazaire for the first time for a 4-day sea trial where her, to name a few things, performance, seaworthiness, noise, vibration levels, and machinery would be tested for the first time. By this point, she was roughly 95% complete. After a successful round of tests, she returned to the shipyard. Then came the news that absolutely no one saw coming. In a move that both was surprising, but at the same time not hard to comprehend, Royal Caribbean announced in mid-September that the expected Asian megaship would not be debuting from China. Instead, Wonder was slated to start her career out of Fort Lauderdale in March 2022, offering 7-night Eastern and Western Caribbean voyages, before heading to the Mediterranean in April to sail out of Barcelona and Civitavecchia. The Mediterranean sailings had originally been scheduled to be performed by Allure, so passengers on those sailings were transferred to Wonder. Michael Bailey took the opportunity to explain the change. He said, "The momentum taking off across bookings of our returning ships in the US and Europe is significant. With half our fleet sailing again, we are encouraged by what we're seeing. These regions are in a position to welcome a brand new, innovative ship like Wonder of the Seas. Wonder will shine bright as the world's newest wonder in the Caribbean and the Mediterranean. And what's in store is the ultimate vacation experience that highlights the very best of Royal Caribbean, reimagines renowned favorites, and introduces new adventures every guest, no matter their age, can enjoy." It wasn't long before Wonder would be arriving in the US. Just over a month later, she was completed enough to leave the French shipyard for the last time and head to a dry dock in Marseille, where additional alterations and last-minute finish work would occur. The biggest change that was seen while there was the altering of her forward nameplate from the traditional lettering to the big lettering that had been recently introduced on Odyssey of the Seas. While there in December, it was announced as a part of their yearly cruise releases that Wonder would be returning to the US after her summer season in Europe and sail cruises out of Port Canaveral starting in November 2022. January 27, 2022. The time had come for C-34 to be officially handed over from STX France to her new owners and be welcomed into the Royal Caribbean Fleet. Taking delivery of Wonder of the Seas is the culmination of 30 months of ingenuity and partnership across more than 2,000 committed crew members and workers who are among the best at what they do. Along with taking the revolutionary Oasis-class ships to a new level of wonder, innovation, and adventure, Wonder sets the stage for the spring and summer vacations families and all travelers alike are looking forward to in the new year. The combination of brand new features and favorites that span thrills, entertainment, dining, and nightlife is unparalleled, and it's what will make our latest and most innovative ship the world's newest wonder and the ultimate vacation in the Caribbean and Europe. The shipyard's general manager was also present at the ceremony. Wonder of the Seas represents a new step forward in the Oasis-class ships. Our teams have worked under difficult conditions, but in a very united way, to finally make major changes that enhance the ship's performance. Wonder is really an outstanding new ship. Later, Wonder departed the dry dock and began her journey across the Atlantic to the US. Wonder of the Seas was now a reality, the finest and biggest statement yet from her owners. At 235,600 gross tons, she was the largest passenger ship to be built at that time. She is 1,187 feet long, 155 feet 6 inches wide at the waterline, and 210 feet wide at her maximum. Across her 19 decks are a variety of new and returning favorites to both the Oasis class as well as her owners. By far the most noticeable change is that she is the first in the Oasis lineup to have 8 distinct neighborhoods, as all the previous sisters had 7. Let's now take a very broad and whirlwind tour of her public areas, working from bottom to top. Deck 3 consists mainly of the lowest sections of several venues, such as the Royal Theater, main dining room, and Studio B, which is the ice skating rink. Four sees the beginning of the main public decks, featuring the neighborhood entertainment place, which includes the casinos, comedy club, Studio B, an art gallery, and more. Deck 5 houses the lowest level of one of the company's signature neighborhoods, first pioneered on Voyage of the Seas in 1999, the Royal Promenade. Within this deck, there are a variety of shops, bars, lounges, and entertainment venues including Spotlight Karaoke, the Spa, Bionic Bar, and the Running Track. 6 is the highest of the lower level public decks, sporting yet another neighborhood, the Boardwalk. The most impressive space found here is the Aqua Theater. Other venues in this area include the exits of the Ultimate Abyss Dry Slides, Johnny Rockets, a carousel, and Playmaker's Sports Bar and Arcade. Deck 7 consists largely of various types of cabins. It is the same with Deck 8. However, one major difference from the one below, and located just on top of the Royal Promenade, is the Central Park neighborhood. Featuring over 20,000 light plans, it has venues including Park Cafe, Giovanni's Italian, 150 Central Park, and the Rising Tide Bar. Decks 9 through 12 are, as it is with 7, mainly filled with more types of cabins. Dotted throughout are a few venues including Wonderland. 14 is similar to the ones below, but perched right up front, just above the ship's bridge, is the lowest level of one of the biggest changes with this member of the class, the Solarium. The majority of the adults-only venue is located on 15. Unlike the previous sisters, which were completely open to the elements and only partially covered with clear windbreakers, the Solarium is completely covered over with semi-transparent white and gray plastic triangles. They are attached to an expansive frame and are filled with air. Another new addition found just aft of this is the View Bar, which replaced the portside cantilevered whirlpool found on the other sisters. In the center, there is a heavily redesigned pool deck, which has much more of a resort style and tropical vibe. Here there are 3 pools, a kids splash zone, 3 water slides, and the lowest levels of the lime and coconut bars. On the aft is the newly positioned and massively expanded Windjammer Buffet and the new Mason Jar Restaurant. Right at the end, one can find the Flowrider Surf Simulator and the kid-focused Wonder Playscape. "16 is the upper level of the main top decks. It has venues including Hook Seafood, more lime and coconut bars, a Local Fresh, an arcade, mini golf, a sports court, zip line, and the entrance of the Ultimate Abyss. Another big difference that can easily be spotted from miles away is what is located just below the ship's funnels located on decks 17 and 18. It is the company's first suite neighborhood, or the first true attempt to have a ship within a ship concept for suite and high loyalty guests for Royal Caribbean. Here, along with the biggest and most well-appointed rooms found on board, is their own restaurant, lounge, and sun deck. Altogether, she can carry 5,734 passengers in double occupancy, or 7,084 if completely filled. 2,369 crew members help aid with taking care of those passengers and the ship. Powering the many venues and the propulsion are several types of engines and generators, including 4 Wärtsilä 12V46F and 2 16V46F engines. Put together, they produce 100,140 kilowatts and 134,290 horsepower. For propulsion, she has 320 MW ABB Azipods. Rated at 27,000 horsepower each, they help the ship achieve an average cruising speed of 22 knots. Additionally, there are 4 5.5 MW Wärtsilä CT3500 bow thrusters, rated at 7,400 horsepower each, that help aid in maneuvering the ship as she enters or exits port. On the evening of February 20th, a large group of spectators, enthusiasts, and members of the media began to gather on the beaches at the mouth of Port Everglades to watch Wonder's first arrival in the US. As the day's ships started to depart on their cruises, Wonder's silhouette could be seen in the distance. With the sun now setting, Wonder made her final approach, passing right by Odyssey of the Seas in the process. Just before 7 p.m., with all the daylight gone, Wonder entered Port Everglades for the first time and docked at Terminal 18. The maiden voyage was only days away. Now was the time to really prepare. The big day finally came on March 4th, 2022. Wonder of the Seas was now ready to take on the world as the largest passenger ship yet, offering all the best that the Oasis class could then offer. Now was the time to ask the big questions. Did the new adjustments work? And what was she like compared to her other sisters? It is safe to say that pretty much all the changes were received with overwhelming positive feedback. Starting with the overall finish and feel, the ship was praised for having a much more modern, colorful, lighter, and brighter feel. Even simple things like the colors chosen for the cabins and bathroom finishes made passengers think that the space was bigger and more open than it actually was. It was the same with the Caribbean resort-style pool deck and how it was reorganized. She was the first ship in the class, from the onset, to really embrace this new style. Before now, the pool area, and much of the exposed decks for that matter, were mostly finished with bare white paint, with maybe the occasional touch of art or color. With the change from white to more tropical and colorful finishes, the ship felt much more vibrant and alive. With regards to the limitation of outward-facing venues, it was felt that the overall design did better in allowing those to enjoy their surroundings more. There is only so much that could be done with an existing class and hull design, but it was clear that a decent effort was made in making her more outward-looking. This includes spaces like the view bar, which replaced the port side cantilevered whirlpool. By far, one of the biggest praises given was the new enclosed and climate-controlled solarium. Finally, there was a large public space on board with views all around that could be utilized in all types of climates and weather. And, like the overall ship herself, the triangular plastic pockets filled with air brought in so much natural light that it felt like one was indeed outside and that the space was far bigger than it actually was. Thanks to the vast number of improvements to layout, finishes, and new offerings, she was an instant and resounding success, a breath of fresh air to the Oasis class design. Royal Caribbean had done their homework well. Just a month after her maiden voyage, Wonder ended her Fort Lauderdale debut and sailed to the Mediterranean for the summer 2022 season. After a season of sailings there, she returned to the US again to cruise out of Port Canaveral on 7-night sailings. It was in January 2023 that I got to cruise on her on a special 8-night sailing. It was mentioned previously that some of Wonder's venues possibly served as tests for future ships to come. That definitely seems to be the case. In January 2024, the lead ship in the first class to dethrone the Oasis as the largest passenger ships ever built entered service. It was the nearly 249,000-ton Icon of the Seas. For those who have cruised on both, such as myself, the similarities are very noticeable in areas, such as the Windjammer with its location, layout, and proximity to public and crew areas. When details on Wonder first came out, it was very unexpected to see such a drastic change in location and size for this venue. Yes, the ones found on previous sisters did have many flaws, but the amount of changes that were made had some wondering how Royal Caribbean settled with this new design and location. When Icon came out, it all made sense. It was a very large test. The mantle of biggest and best had now been passed to the new Icon class, but that did not mean the Oasis class was finished innovating. Just weeks after Icon's maiden voyage, it was announced that a 7th had been ordered with an expected delivery of 2028. And in the same spirit of wonder with everything she brought to the class, the 6th ship, Utopia of the Seas, entered service as the world's biggest weekend in July 2024. Everything that Utopia brought, whether it be her unique operation or the additional unique features she introduced, is a story for another day. Suffice to say, she is equally as successful as Wonder was, maybe in some ways even more so. Knowing full well how much Utopia was going to change things in the industry, it was announced just a few days after the 7th vessel order that Wonder would be joining Utopia and offering 3 and 4 night sailings out of the port of Miami starting in August 2025, after the 2nd Icon member, Star of the Seas, takes her slot in Canaveral. As of the making of this video, Wonder of the Seas, now the 3rd largest passenger ship ever built, is continuing to sail for Royal Caribbean International. She is currently based out of Port Canaveral, offering 7-night Caribbean cruises through August. She will then transition to running 3 and 4 night Bahamas cruises out of Miami through at least April 2027. When Oasis and Allure were first introduced, it was thought that they would be a one-off, even if they ended up being well received. To the surprise of those who doubted them, the industry began to accept and embrace them at a rate far quicker than expected. With strong support and with more confidence than ever, their owners blazed the trail even further by ordering multiple pairs of sisters, each building on the lessons of the last. Who would have thought in the beginning that not only would there be at least 7 of these monsters sailing the world's oceans, but that the class would become one of the most successful in passenger ship history. In the case of Wonder, it was because of her unique position in the timeline of her owners and the industry at large that allowed her to not only be the most well-designed member of the class at the time, but to serve as a stepping stone to carry the company into a more modern, colorful, and even bolder timeline. Though some of the changes that were implemented into the design were due to her intended role of being an Asia-based cruise ship, they still serve very well in her current home. She was indeed a breath of fresh air. Those many improvements were then further adjusted in the most recent sister to join the class, whom has seen, in some ways, an even stronger start than Wonder did. Wonder of the Seas is no longer the biggest, or arguably the best in the class, but she is poised to continue to cause ripples that will be felt throughout the cruise industry, just as she did when she first debuted, for many years to come. That is all thanks to her innovative, novel approach to the design of a lineup of ships that first commenced almost 2 decades prior.
you want more than to stay alive. So come on over, we can make it through. Take my hand, I know just what to do. On the beat, keep dancing through the night. Stay up until the morning light, the morning light. Oh, so come on over, we can make it through. Take my hand, I know just what to do. On the beat, keep dancing through the night. Stay up until the morning light, the morning light. Oh, the morning light. Oh, I just wanna be your Superman. Come fly with me, just take my hand. And now that we are cruising in mid-flight, you better watch out for the kryptonite. So come on over, we can make it through, make it through. Take my hand, I know just what to do, just what to do. On the beat, keep dancing through the night, we're dancing. We stay up until the morning light, the morning light. Oh, so come on over, we can make it through, make it through. Take my hand, I know just what to do, what to do. On the beat, keep dancing through the night. Stay up until the morning light, the morning light. Oh. As we look up at the stars in the sky, did we ever stop and wondered why we let our love shine all through the night? Just you and me, babe, until the morning light, the morning light. So come on over, we can make it through. Take my hand, I know just what to do, just what to do. On the beat, keep dancing through the night, keep dancing. We stay up until the morning light, the morning light. Baby, you're out of sight. On the beat, keep dancing through
a new home for a while, let me feel alive. Nothing to hold me back, take my time, just enjoy the ride. A new man passing by, life is good, best I've ever felt. Get me up, somewhere new, somewhere I can find myself. Oh, I feel so alive. As I reach out to the sky. I found my way. I was in the dark against it all, but made it through the day. Cause I found my way. In bad times, I know I'll be okay. Cause I found my way. Cause I found my way. Cause I found my way. My way. Find my way. My way. Cause I found my way. My way. Find my way. My way. I found my way. I was in the dark against it all, but made it through the day. Cause I found my way. In bad times, I know I'll be okay. Cause I found my way. Cause I found my way. Cause I found my way. My way. Find my way. My way. Cause I found my way. My way. Find my way. My way.